Welcome, friends, to Belt of Truth Live. I'm your host, Scott Ritzema, again for another program. You're going to love our guest tonight. I know a lot of you guys are familiar with Dr. Tim Perenich. We're going to go to him in a moment. But first, I want to tell you what the topic is tonight, because he deals with a lot of different topics, of course. And we're going to go into kind of the things in medical science and the health movement that were once viewed as extreme and fanatical, and concerns about fluoride and GMOs and things like the word that here's how I'll mention it. Dr. Tim and I are really big fans of talking about vaccines. And that vaccine conversation, we want to make sure there is no misinformation about it. And so we're going to have this interview just on fluoride. He's going to come back another time for GMOs and glyphosate and endocrine disruptors and a lot of other topics. And so I hope to have Dr. Tim as a regular guest. He's a good friend of mine. And then tonight, we're going to actually carry on with the discussion about vaccines over at beltoftruth.tv. So mark that in your browser, open a tab, go to beltoftruth.tv, and you'll see the video there in the Belt of Truth Live collection. Now, you saw on the screen just a moment ago, this is what makes this channel possible. These throat sprays, just 4.9 stars. People love them because they work during this time of year, especially. You spray that stuff on there. We'll tell you over on beltoftruth.tv the key ingredient that I can't mention on here because YouTube by name has identified that as medical misinformation. But there's a peppermint in there. It's sweet and tasty, and iodine, especially the iodine in the nostrils. When you feel something coming on, that actually is very effective, and that's why people love those items. So thanks to the sponsor, RevitaLiving.health. Now, I want to introduce our guest, Dr. Tim Perenich. Now, first thing out of the gates, we got to get our names straight here. He's just Dr. Tim on the screen there, but the spelling of the last name, Perenich, right? And most people say, well, that's Tim Perenich, right? With 3 syllables. Is that correct?
Perenich, yeah, 2
syllables.
Yeah.
And Ritzema is 3 syllables. So sometimes people get those backwards.
Yeah.
And they give you 3 syllables and they give me 2 syllables. Ritzema. No. Yeah. Ritzema and Perenich. You clarified that when we first got acquainted a few years ago. You're like, Scott, it's like the fruit and the name Nick. So now we got that straight. But if that went in anybody's ear and out the other ear, Dr. Tim and Brother Scott. So we're glad you're all with us. And we're talking fluoride today. So I think we kind of have a similar background where 20 years ago, we're filtering our water. We're concerned about things that people are like, you guys are crazy. What are you, afraid the communists are? What's the origins of that, by the way, where you're not supposed to be concerned about fluoride because of some conspiracy theory about communists? And so, how did this become mainstream? Give us just a little bit of background in general on the fluoride topic before we roll into your slides on that.
Absolutely. Well, the reason why fluoride's come back into the mainstream is because of a circuit court case. It was a case brought before the Ninth Circuit, which is ironically this very, very same circuit that oversees Oregon, Washington, and California. So they are generally inclined to be more left of center. And this case went up to them, and the judge basically asked the EPA, do you have any studies to prove that fluoride doesn't cause neurological developmental delays or doesn't cause loss of IQ? And the EPA said, no, we've never done those studies. And what's funny is that research had been accumulating over the decades showing that it had. So that's how it kind of got started. And of course, with the nomination of RFK Jr. To the NIH, being over everything, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So he's over everything. And him saying, I think we'll be able to get fluoride out of the water. This has sort of brought fluoride back to the mainstream. But fluoride long ago was normally thought of as a neurotoxin. It used to be put in rat poison, bug spray, and things like that. And so people were skeptical of fluoride before it became one of the large public health victories or whatever. It's interesting, as we go through the presentation, we'll see how toothpaste manufacturers and people started advertising fluoride. They had to try to convince the public that it was good for them, whereas early in the history of fluoride or fluoridation of water, people were skeptical. They didn't think that fluoride was actually good for you because they were like, well, that's what we put in rat poison, that we know it's a neurological toxin. And so through the efforts of school and the American Dental Association and other powerful lobby groups, we have been convinced over the years that fluoride has been really good for us. And of course, there was that famous movie, Dr. Strangelove, where the general who's lost his mind talks about how fluoride is a part of a communist plot to dumb down people and sort of make them more pliant, and that he keeps those type of things out of his water and all those other stuff. So that's kind of where it started. And it's always been, oh, well, you know, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. But interestingly, the science has been there for a long time. It's just that through the voices that have the microphones and the media and agencies like the American Dental Association, it has been crowded out. And so for years, all we've been told is that fluoride is safe and effective. So that's kind of a very short window into it.
That is so interesting. Now, this is especially significant and personal to me because I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And anybody who knows the fluoride discussion and history, Grand Rapids was the town that first spearheaded this and pioneered water fluoridation, which I know, Dr. Tim, you're going to talk about all the erroneous elements of that. But, you know,
Yep.
I'm from the place, and they've got a big plaque, like a historical monument, where we're proud of the fact that we were the first ones to care about everybody's teeth in this mass medical experiment. But take us through how we got to where we are today with this going mainstream and what we knew. Like, that was so interesting. I want to hear all this history because you're telling us way back people knew this, and then we kind of forgot it during that, you know, boomer trust the institutions phase. And now we're in more the skeptical phase in these historical cycles that I know, you know, history, you know about historical cycles, but take us through your slides. Let's learn together.
Yeah, let's take a look. So here we are. This is a presentation I did, and let me see here. So if you look here, this is the beginning of it. Let me just start you right here at the top. So here it is. This is in 1955, and you see the guy with the toothpaste, and this is an advertisement telling you that they're, so listen to this, announcing, this is 1955, announcing the first major toothpaste advanced since fluoride. Now Ipenna has hexafluoride. So in other words, they're saying, hey, we have this special fluoride. So in the 50s, they're telling people, look, we're on the cutting edge of science. We're putting fluoride into the toothpaste, which tells you, well, how did we fight cavities without putting fluoride in the toothpaste for many years? Now, you have to understand that your bones generally have a little bit of fluoride in it. Fluoride does naturally occur in the Earth's crust. Sometimes you can get it in food, but it's in such small amounts that it's negligible. However, your bones do have it, and fluoride is thought to be something that binds with calcium to make your bones stronger. But what's never been demonstrated is that drinking fluoride or swallowing your toothpaste is going to make your bones stronger. And actually what we're going to see is it actually has other effects, but you can see them advertising here. Here's another one. This is a 19, I think this is what, 1955 again, or 56. Here's another one, you know, magical new fluoride toothpaste. I mean, imagine that. We're so used to fluoridated toothpaste that we're just like, oh, everyone has it. But they were saying, look, this toothpaste has fluoride. This is great. We're following the science. And again, they hailed it as this miracle that was going to save people from tooth decay. But here's the interesting thing. This is from the WHO. And this is in 1961. So this is from the WHO. And so the WHO got early on promoting fluoride. And they were like, hey, we want fluoride in the water. And they were lobbying the different countries to say, put fluoride in the water. And so they were supporting all this. And what happened is that they were tracking how counties were voting to put fluoride in the water. Now, listen to what they say here, because they're for it. But notice how Americans thought of fluoride in 1961. So it says this: election returns fluoridation. So how did the elections pan out in 1960 in 1960, most likely? It says, by late November, the American Dental Association reports at least 1 million citizens had been tallied as the losers in the elections, regardless of political affiliation. This figure represents the approximate population of communities in which fluoridation proposals are known to have been defeated at the ballot box. So think about this. In 1961, you couldn't convince hardly anyone. Now, there are counties that did, and they mentioned that, the winners. But notice that they said millions of people voted not to have fluoride in the water. The question is, why wouldn't they want fluoride in their water?
Yeah, everybody knows it's amazing, right? For the last 60 years, 70, 80.
Exactly. This is my point. Like early on, let's see.
Hey, by the way, I didn't do your bio, folks. Dr. Tim, he's written the book literally on vaccination. And again, we love talking, we love vaccines because we love discussing these things. And he's got a book on this. I don't know, Jeremy, do you have a QR code where people can go get his book? Because I know not everybody will go over to beltoftruth.tv and listen to that part of the interview. That's fine. Get his book at least. And by the way, beltoftruth.tv is free for the asking for those who don't want to participate in the contribution of $7. But do purchase his book. That is a worthy investment. And chiropractor, church historian, ancient historian, studied law. So I appreciate the kind of what the Lord has done for you and in your life and through you, giving you the knowledge that you're able to share with us. So yeah, keep going with that one.
Praise the Lord. That's very generous of you. So I just want you to see this now for your audience. They may recognize this publication here. This is Good Health. This is an Adventist health publication. And what's fascinating about this is this was our major health organ for decades. It actually started with John Harvey Kellogg and the Health Reformer, and even before him, and then it transitioned to Good Health. And basically what it was our organ to talk about how we felt on medical issues. So in the book that I co-authored, we actually show what they thought about the issue of vaccines long ago and how it changed and what they thought. But on this issue, on fluoride, this is interesting. They ultimately come out supporting fluoridation. But in this article, which is in 1963, it's this medical doctor writing this article on fluoridation has a lot of questions. And so what he does is he interviews dentists from Loma Linda, 2 of them, to ask them what their take on fluoridation was. Because again, we're told that fluoride was never controversial. Everyone just was happy to take it, happy to put it in their water. But you just saw the WHO demonstrated that there were people who didn't want it in the water. A lot of Americans didn't want it. And Loma Linda, at the Dental School of Dentistry, they were divided as well. So it wasn't automatically accepted. It took a lot of time and a lot of people promoting it and money behind it to get people to think that it worked. But you got to ask yourself, why didn't they want it? Why didn't they accept it? So here's the article, and this is how he concludes. All right. So this is a medical doctor. What is it? O.S. Parrott. Yeah, O.S. Parrott. I might be pronouncing it wrong. MD. So he's a medical doctor, and he's sometimes a guest author here. And this is what he says, and I want you to see this. So listen, this is how he feels about fluoridation in his water. He goes, I would choose the water from my own 99-foot deep well, tasty and pure as any I might wish, and not be bothered even with chlorine. It's interesting. So here's a medical doctor who's even skeptical of putting too much chlorine in the water. He'd rather drink fresh well water, which is admirable, but I'm just pointing it out. The things that we take for granted, not everyone was on board as they were coming out. And he says this, what about you, city dweller, where public water is fluoridated? Until research has proved that fluorides do no harm in the organs with advancing years, my children and I will drink bottled water. That's pretty amazing, Scott, considering that here's a guy who's a medical doctor who's not on board with that.
Right, totally. And so we're insulated from that history. And we view things through, those who present this in the mainstream for us. One of the things, I don't know if this came out in any of these publications, but to me, the most simple objection to this, kind of the most obvious glaring problem with public water fluoridation has always been, to me, you can't control for dosage.
That's right.
And how much of this water are people drinking, of what body weights, and what are their peculiar needs or risk factors that this may, like you were saying earlier, and you're going to get back to this, I'm sure, that there have been studies all along showing IQ reduction through fluoride.
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of a big bomb you dropped in your opener. Yeah. So let's keep going through this. But yeah, I'm seeing what you're saying here. There was never a just like opening consensus where out of the blue, everybody found this to be the most obvious thing that we all have to do.
Especially right away. And so now he goes on to this. Now he's going to talk about the 2 different dentists that he consulted before writing this article. One is sort of for fluoride and the other's against it. And he says, I would accept the verdict of these 2 scientists on the advantages of a way of life. So he's basically talking about how to keep your teeth. And they both agree that the most effective way to reduce cavity is not fluoridation, but nutrition and keeping sugar out of your diet or limiting it to fruits and natural occurring sugars. That's their argument. Both of them agree on that. And so they both agree that's the best way to go. And of course, we're big lifestyle advocates. And so now he goes to the last paragraph, his conclusion. He says, I wrote to Dr. McKay. Dr. McKay was the dentist who was against fluoridation. He says, I wrote to Dr. McKay not knowing he had passed away in June of 1967. I'm sorry, this article was in 1968. And Miss McKay told me he never changed his opinion about fluoride. So in 1967, this dentist still believed that fluoride was not useful in the water and was not safe. And she said that he never changed his opinion about fluoride. He believed that the people who had confidence in it should not expect to force it on the general public, but were free to take it or give it to their families in a tablet or pill, because after 8 years, it did nothing for the child and aided the risk in adults. No one has come forward with proof that fluoride cannot injure people who use it over a long period. I concur with Dr. McKay's opinion. Now, I just want to get your take on this. One, what do you think about the public health argument he just made there, that if you want something that isn't proven to be safe or effective, you can have it, but to force it on the general public is wrong? What do you think about that?
Our bodies are the temple of the living God, and we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice or for a spiritual act of worship. That's Romans 12. And health choices are worship choices.
Yeah.
And that might sound like, really, fluoride? But no, everything I put in my body is a spiritual decision.
Yes.
And each individual has to make that. That's why I was getting fired up when you got to that part about this is being forced on everybody by putting it in their water.
Right.
There maybe are some relevant current issues in recent history that this would be germane as a subject for, but we'll try to avoid that on this particular platform. But I think I know where you're going with that, Dr. Tim, because we can't necessarily, we ought not, according to God's laws of life for the universe, mandate and impose medicine upon people without their informed consent, right?
Right. And let's just say that fluoride is safe and effective for most people. So let's say 80%. Well, it may not be effective or safe for 20% of the population. Should they be forced to endure disease and sickness and loss of cognition for the rest of the 80%?
Or even 2%.
Right.
Even 2%.
Right.
You just can't, it's just wrong. And in law, law, you'd rather see 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man be put into prison.
That's right.
So, public health and public acts in the civic realm need to take into account individual liberty. By the way, I loved how you were talking about how nutrition is the answer to these problems. Your organization, your ministry, your publishing outlet is called Restoring the Right Hand.
Yes.
The right hand or the right arm of the gospel is why we are here. We're not here just to, discuss fluoride. I mean, that's kind of interesting to both of us. But what is really the purpose that we're here is to show God's methods and God's methods for healing that bring us ultimately the best body and mind we can have. And if folks disagree and want to take fluoride, that's fine. You may hear that it harms the brain and affects cognitive function. So you may want to rethink that, but we do believe in freedom for everybody.
Right. You may accept what your dentist says and just trust him. That's fine by me. I won't stop you. But you should know everything here. So here's an interesting study. Okay. So this study was published in 1969. So fluoridation roughly happens in the 50s, and it depends on where it's happening in some places in Europe. And so they start doing these studies and they're looking at this. And this was, again, published in the Annals of Rheumatological Disease in 1969. And they report the idea that fluoride actually causes bones to have fluorosis. And they're not talking about heavy duty amounts. They're talking about regular amounts. And they realize that this is a problem even in there. They are mentioning that it's going to cause the bones to break apart. And they look at this and they're saying, maybe there's a problem here. Maybe we should start to look at this because it's causing degeneration in the bones, degeneration of the joints, which would be rheumatological diseases. So it's interesting. Notice what he says here, the big ones. So here are the big ones. In some countries, fluorides are used tentatively in the treatment of osteoporosis, metastatic bone disease, and Paget's disease. But then he looks at it that higher doses over longer periods of time has causes toxic problems to the body and skin. So it's very interesting that this is in 1969 and they're already beginning to question it. Now, this is someone who many are familiar with. This is Dr. John McDougall writing in the Vegetarian Times. And he's writing in here, I want to say this is 1987. This is 1987. Yep. And McDougall here is writing about this. And because, again, people were questioning it. People had always been questioning it. But when the American Dental Association and the big manufacturers and all these people, some argue that the aluminum industry was a big proponent of fluoridation because they could then dispose of sodium fluoride, which is a byproduct of purifying and refining aluminum. So that's one of the arguments that has been made. And so many people track the money behind this with them. But anyways, listen to what McDougall...
Wait, just pause there. Dispose of. Why do they need to dispose of it?
Well, because it's technically considered a toxic waste. So
okay, just pause. Did everybody hear that?
Yeah.
I mean, keep going. I just want to make sure that people didn't miss that.
Yeah, no. Sodium fluoride is a poisonous substance. If you ever watch a video, you can see it on YouTube. When they're dumping sodium fluoride into the water, they have to wear a respirator. They have to wear gloves, goggles, because it is a known neurotoxical agent. So even if you don't get it on you, but you breathe in the fumes, it could ruin you. But the argument is, well, we put in so low doses, it doesn't matter. Right. But here's the argument, the counter argument, that if you're drinking water from the tap for 50 years, doesn't it accumulate? And yes, it does. Your kidneys excrete it, but it takes a while to get it out. And if it embeds in your bones, embeds in the soft tissue, it starts to calcify. So there's problems with that. But this is what McDougall says. He says, from community health viewpoint, fluoridation of drinking water makes sense. However, from an individual viewpoint, fluoridation can be considered a gross violation of the right to have pure drinking water out of the tap. Personally, I don't want drinking water fluoridated. If a decision is made to fluoridate our water in Hawaii, I may find another source of drinking water for my family. So even he, not going full crazy on it, was like, I know it's bad. I'm a medical doctor. I know that it's used in different things. As a matter of fact, I believe that fluoride is also used in certain psychotropic drugs like Prozac. It's actually used in there. It's part of the mineral content. Now, again, people would say it's small, but it's because it has neurological effects.
Dr. Tim, were people in the 60s and 80s, were these voices libeled and ridiculed as conspiracy theorists, or was that mostly just, when we've been studying this the last 30 years or so that started to rise up?
Yeah, I think probably by the time you get to the 80s, okay, I think that's when we start getting there. So even as he's saying it, I think that's where they're starting to ramp up this idea, because I remember being a kid and I remember they would serve fluoride at school for you to swish. And because they just thought it was a public health thing. Oh, you could go swish and think about it. They're literally administering a drug to you at school without your parents even being there. And, they always tell you, don't swallow, don't swallow, don't swallow. But if you do, if you're even a little bit, I mean, how much? This is why the dentist, when you go there and they do fluoride treatments on your teeth, they put a vacuum in your mouth. And your toothpaste says, do not swallow. Call poison control if you swallow.
That should tell us something.
That should tell you something. And we're not talking like, a glob of toothpaste. We're talking a dot of toothpaste. And I remember as a kid, so, you know how they would advertise toothpaste for kids. They would make it taste like candy. And I remember I had this bubblegum toothpaste and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I remember, taking swipes of it and putting it in my mouth. I'd probably have a much higher IQ.
Hey, I'm from Grand Rapids, so you can't blame me for my problems around here.
Exactly. So this is an interesting study. This is from a cancer journal, and in this journal, this is from the Journal of National Cancer Institute. And there was originally, and this was in 1990. So people thought that there were problems with fluoride even back then, and they were studying it. And so the Cancer Institute noted that some cancers developed more rapidly in areas where fluoridation was in the water. They noticed this because fluoride has the ability to break down tissues and mess with your immune system and neurologically hurt you as well. So they researched it. Now, ultimately, the National Cancer Institute concluded in rats that fluoride was safe and effective. That's what they concluded. However, in the discussion, they show these tissues, and of course, it's difficult to make out what's there in the black and white. But essentially, what they conclude is that in these tissues, they notice precancerous changes in these rats. They noticed that they started to have cancer changes in their soft tissue when they gave them sodium fluoride. So they knew that there was a problem there, but they, of course, went along with the ADA, AMA, and all the other agencies saying, well, we still think it's safe, but we do notice some changes there. They were willing to go out on that limb. This is where that whole conspiracy theory, that type of mentality started to grow, where people were afraid to publish their conclusions because they didn't want to be labeled as such. But these guys, as early as 1990, were already saying, yeah, there's definitely something there. We're not going to say it's causing cancer, but we'll say that it definitely caused precancerous changes in the soft tissues of the rats that we were experimenting on.
I want us to, on the other side, over at beltoftruth.tv, can you talk about ADA, AMA, and the American Academy of Pediatrics?
Yes.
I'm emphasizing that one for the subsequent topic.
Yes.
And how these organizations become so captured,
yes.
like regulatory agencies. Like, I get how regulatory capture happens. You know, I'm a political
yes.
science guy. I can explain that.
Yes.
But I really want to understand how these colleges of the what do you call them, like the accrediting agencies and so on within mainstream medicine, pick that up over there, because I want you to really be able to speak freely on the pediatric side as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, just bring that up, we'll do it for sure. So this is another interesting study as well, and they were looking at, so in this study here, they were looking at fluoride and causing osteomalacia. Now, osteomalacia is basically where the bones get thick with calcium, but the calcium, you have to understand this, like if you have ever used Legos, if you take a handful of Legos and drop them on each other, you'll make a pile. But in order to make a structure, you have to put the Legos together in a pattern that matters. And even if you put the Legos together at random, stacking them here and there, if you don't build a nice base and you don't do it in an organized fashion, it will still be unstable. And your bones are no different. You have osteoclasts and osteoblasts, two different types of cells. The osteoblasts lay down calcium, and they do it in a very organized fashion. And osteoclasts remove calcium in areas where there may be too much, so that your bones are designed to have the perfect amount of strength without too much weight. That's how it is. And of course, to do that, the osteoclast and osteoblast need a healthy diet where you get your vitamins and minerals and nutrients, including vitamin D and all the other things that you need to do that. But if you have too much fluoride in your diet, what happens is the osteoblasts lay down too much calcium and the bones become chalky. They look thick and strong, but they're actually weak. And so what they found is that there were certain people in locales where their water was fluoridated, and they noticed that they had more fractures than in other locales where the fluoride was not put in the water. And so they did a study to see if this would make a difference in rats. And what they found out is that in people who have any sort of kidney damage, let's say you were born with one kidney, let's say that you had damage to it when you were a kid, or your kidneys just don't excrete as much of the minerals out of your blood or out of your system. If you have renal deficiency, any of it, or just diminished kidney function, you're going to retain more fluoride, and that fluoride is going to be laid down in the bone, and that bone is actually going to be weak. And they found that in rats. And so they actually recommend in their conclusion, they actually conclude that in certain areas where there's fluoride, too much fluoride in the water, what they conclude is that in people who have kidney insufficiency, that they should not drink, or they should figure out how not to get as much fluoride in their water, or basically start going to bottled water, because it was going to be bad for them. And they even put a call out to public health. So you can see even here, and I think this is 2002, 2004. I think that's when the study was published. So even there, it starts to go. And again, this isn't like me making this up. This isn't right. This isn't some alternative medicine rag where we're believing in chakras and things like that. This is actually people who are looking at the science here. So it's kind of impressive. Sorry, this is 1996. It was published. So this is 96.
Dr. Tim,
yeah,
I like how you gave people kind of a solution there. How do we not, like, even if we don't have kidney problems, I think probably most of us want to be working on this fluoride question. And what are the action items that you give to people to drink the best water that they can drink? Because that's one of the laws of health. We want good quality water, uncontaminated. So what's your recommendation for how the audience gets good non-fluoridated water without other, problems? Like the guy was mentioning as well, 60, 80 years ago.
Yep.
And, that might have been great then, but I live in an agricultural belt and our well water is probably contaminated with glyphosate, right?
Oh yeah.
So we filter ours with a gravity fed, drip, drip, drip water style, like an Alexa Pure or Pro Pure or Berkey, like those kinds.
Yeah, those are
what do you recommend for people drinking good water?
So I've looked into this, and one of the things that they say is it's very hard to get fluoride, especially if they're dumping sodium fluoride into the water. Naturally occurring fluoride may be a little bit easier to take out. I'm not sure exactly why that is. Maybe because it's bound to something else. I don't know. I would imagine they're both tough, but generally they recommend using reverse osmosis. So I think that's the way to do it if you want to get rid of it. Obviously, sometimes bottled water, generally if it's made with reverse osmosis, that's good. But you probably want to stay away from too many plastics. I mean, obviously, if you have to drink water, it's a challenge. I do recommend that anyone who's using water wherever they get it, we should start filtering. And unless you live out in Montana, Wyoming, or somewhere way out there where you can tap into a pure aquifer, you probably want to be filtering your water just to be on the safe side. Reverse osmosis, obviously the best one is distillation, but if you do distillation, you want to add maybe a tiny bit of Himalayan sea salt or something like that in there, so you get some minerals back in. But otherwise, reverse osmosis. And now they make reverse osmosis filters for the entire house, so you can even bathe in it if you need to. But just depends on your budget and what you're willing to do.
I remember 20 years ago was where I started listening to this kind of it's not even alternative medicine viewpoint, like you said. This is mainstream science. But I remember I had a Berkey at that point. And they had these additional filters you had to screw on to the bottom of the regular filter. And it was a PF2 filter. I still remember what it was called. And it was for fluoride, because you're saying fluoride's hard to get out. And mainly what you're talking about is city water, right? Folks on well water aren't as worried about getting fluoride out.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So the problem with fluoride is that I was listening to, and we'll get to it, but
keep going.
The Florida Surgeon General, Joseph Ladapo, just made a declaration probably a couple weeks ago that he was recommending that counties suspend their water fluoridation program. Now, as a Surgeon General of Florida, he can't go county by county and tell them you must do this, but he can make strong recommendations, and we'll get to why he made them. But he made them, and so the idea is that the counties need to start removing this. And there's actually a good movement afoot now with the data and the federal district court or the federal circuit court, the Ninth Circuit's opinion, and whatever is going to happen in the near future, that you may be able to lobby or petition your county government to start removing it, because they may be liable for damages. They may be liable for all these other things. Again, let's just say that, as I mentioned, if fluoride was healthy for most people, if you're a kid, think about it. You and your kid drink 8 ounces of water. You're getting the same dose of fluoride, and yet you're an adult and your kid is a child. And, I don't know how much your oldest son weighs, but he's still probably, 40, 50 pounds off of you, maybe.
Yeah.
About
half.
So, right.
Yeah. So he's getting twice as much the intensity of it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So again, we've done this sort of uncritically. And so I really think there's a lot of work to be done in removing it. But you're right. If you're on farmland, they're not dumping it in there. The problem I was going to say is that with all these counties doing it, sometimes the farmers are tapping into the city water and they're watering crops with fluoride on it. So you can get some that way too. Dr. Ladapo mentioned that, I think he said 60% of all our fluoride intake is from water. So that means there's 40% that we may be getting from food and from other sources that we don't know. Because, think about it. You go to a restaurant and let's say they make you pasta. they're boiling it in water that may already be fluoridated. It's in your food.
Well, if we can control the parts that we can control,
yes,
and just do our best, that's all that the Lord will ask of us. And
right.
and we'll. By the way, Jeremy, take me down. I want Dr. Tim to just roll for a while, because this has been a great conversation. I can jump in every other slide here, but I want our listeners to be able to really get the data dump from you now. You're going to eventually get to that IQ part, and I know there's a lot more quality content coming. So, Dr. Tim, you roll. Don't let me interrupt. Don't stop. Just keep going for 20 minutes.
You got it. We'll hit it. So, yes. So anyways, this study is from 2004. This is biomedical and environmental sciences. So, it sounds like something we would all like today. And so what they looked at is they took human embryo hepatocytes, which are liver cells, and they wanted to see the effects of fluoride on it. And they tried to use roughly what would be the same type of levels you would get in your drinking water. And what they found is that fluoride could harm human liver cells, that it could cause damage to it. And they call it lipid peroxidation, which is the idea that it is causing lipids, which is fats, to be oxidized, and that causes more inflammation that damages liver cells or hepatocytes. So they found that, and again, this can drive cancer. When you damage cells and they start to die, this can drive cancer. This can drive cirrhosis. This can drive non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. All these other problems with the liver, this can drive that. It's not the main cause, but it may be a contributory cause, and it may certainly affect the liver. And again, this is what they found in 2004. So people aren't making it up. They had serious concerns from the very beginning about fluoride. Here's another study from India, and they were looking at the effects. So this is in 2005, and they were looking at the effects of fluoride on thyroid hormone and how it affected children. Because remember, children are going to be more susceptible to minerals and chemicals than adults would be. That's generally the case, because children's cells are dividing more rapidly. Their full defenses aren't up. And so when you're introducing toxins and things like that, it's going to have a stronger effect. We know this. I mean, this is how we practice medicine. We don't give the same doses of a drug that we would give to an adult as we give to the child for the most part. And so listen to what they said here. So this is sort of their conclusions that they think that you need to do. It says children with dental fluorosis living in endemic fluorosis areas of what is it? IDD. I think that's it should be this is thyroid. So it's this thyroid deficiency, and so may have thyroid derangements that require special care and attention. So what they're saying is in areas where the fluoride's too much and kids get dental fluorosis, they may have other problems with their thyroid. And it says the primary cause of thyroid deficiency or disease may not always be an iodine deficiency, but it might be induced with fluoride poisoning. So what they notice is that fluoride, if it gets attached to the thyroid, which is responsible for growth hormone, metabolic control, and you wonder how many people suffer from obesity or have a hard time losing weight because their thyroid is being made inactive by high doses of fluoride, because fluoride can disperse or push off iodine. So even when you're giving people other sources of iodine, because they have so much fluoride in their system, they're not even able to absorb it. And then it says testing of drinking water. So these are the recommendations that they're making. The testing of drinking water and bodily fluids for fluoride content, along with free T3, which is a thyroid hormone. This is triiodothyroxide. And then there is this T4, free T4 is thyroxine, and TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, even in children without dental fluorosis, is desirable for recognizing thyroid derangements. So in other words, they felt like they needed to test to see what's going on with some of these kids and their thyroid with where water was fluoridization. And they said prevention and control of fluorosis and thyroid disease require an integrated approach for the diagnosis and patient management, contrary to prevailing practices. So they believe it's a problem and people need to get together this. And then it says this: the results of this study question the validity of fluoridation in drinking water, milk, fruit juices, and salt by public health authorities.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
Putting it mildly. That's exactly. And this is in 2005. I mean, they're already seeing this. This isn't anything here. So this is a great article here, and this is in, I believe, 2006, and this is Prevention. So this is a magazine that's sort of about health, and this is kind of the time where the the research about fluoride is starting to add up. There's starting to be a wave or a crescendo, so to speak, and people are really awakening to it. And so prevention is not, prevention will talk about diet, exercise, ways to live longer, but it's not like in a complete alternative health magazine. So you have to realize that when it makes it to here, this is pretty mainstream magazine. And they talk about, fluoride in the water. And now notice this, they're looking at the research and they said fluoride has been tied to bone cancer, lower IQs, osteoporosis. So why is it still being added to your water? Now, we're not going to have time to read the article, but they even show the history. And look, here's a nice picture here. You can see the person here. It may be hard for your screen, but you can see the person here. They have to wear the mask and they're done.
Yep.
Yeah, you could see it in the water. And remember, I mentioned Dr. Strangelove, 1964. And they talk about how it got in there. And they do a great job documenting. And they get a quote from one of these doctors says fluoridation could turn out to be one of the top 10 mistakes of the 21st century. That's how crazy this is, because they realize that it's not good. And of course, they have 10 steps into cutting back on fluoride. And they talk about finding out if your fluoride is in the water. Make sure your children use non-fluoridated toothpaste, use filters. They even mention choose organic fruits and vegetables because they're going to have less fluoride in it. And then, of course, they talk about, they even talk about processed meat. Now, as many of us don't eat meat, so that's good. But for those who do, you're going to find higher amounts of fluoride in processed meats. And then, of course, make sure that your baby formula doesn't have any fluoride in it. So that was really good. But this is in 2006. And so you see that even here in this mainstream publication, they're saying, hey, fluoride isn't good. Fluoride is not good at all. So,
Dr. Tim, can I invite people to email me and I'll send them this article?
Yes.
Because this, if I'm in the listener's shoes, I get to have it right in front of me. I want to read this article.
Yeah.
So if you guys want this article from Prevention Magazine from 2006, just email me, scottritzema@gmail.com.
Yeah.
I'll cut these slides out and send that over to you.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, because I do, it's a shame I don't have time to read it, but I do think other people would be amazed on what
you're doing great. You're giving us the overview and the key points. So I don't want to get lost in the weeds. Folks can read every word of that on their own.
Right. So here, this is where there's more research now. And again, 2006, they were already looking at studies talking about lowering your IQ. And here's one I just pulled up. There's many more than this. Don't get me wrong. There's many more. And it says decreased intelligence in children and exposure to fluoride and arsenic in the drinking water. So again, fluoride is the main culprit, but they also throw in arsenic, which we know is toxic. But listen to what it says. In conclusion, the data from this research support the conclusion that fluoride and arsenic in the drinking water potential neurotoxic effect in children. It is urgent that public health measures to reduce exposure levels be implemented. Millions of people around the world are exposed to these pollutants and therefore potentially at risk for negative impact on intelligence. This risk may be increased where other factors affecting central nervous system development, such as malnutrition, poverty, are also present. The risk is particularly acute for children whose brains are particularly sensitive to environmental toxins. Furthermore, it'd be advisable to re-examine the benefit of fluoride given the document health risks. 2007.
Yeah, this didn't start with RFK in this last election cycle or Joe Ladapo in Florida, did it?
That's right. Not at all. Not at all. So again, the point of the matter is that we're all like, oh, well, this is conspiracy theory, but this is not. This has been going on for some time. These guys were saying that they were warning about it. They were saying, hey, we need to do something about this. And again, this is another mainstream science publication. So here we go to another one. And this is the Journal of Indian Society of Periodontics and Preventive Dentistry. So they're looking at skeletal, they're looking at dental fluorosis and IQ. And the idea is that if you start to develop dental fluorosis, that means your fluoride levels are so high that it's ruining your teeth. What most people don't understand is that if you have too much fluoride, it starts to pit and harm your teeth. So they try to say there's a sweet spot. But what they've noticed is that once you get past that sweet spot, and I don't know what the therapeutic window is of fluoride. I don't know. And it may be individually dependent. If your kidneys don't work too well, if there's other sources of fluoride that you don't know about, if you're unable to excrete it for any reason, whatever it is, once you get too much, they notice that in addition to having dental fluorosis, that you also lose IQ points. And this is what they were saying in 2011. They were noticing that in India, and they were talking about it. So pretty interesting here. Now, this is one of my favorite studies. And this was done, and I like it because it brings in history. So many people remember Mount Vesuvius destroying Pompeii. There was another city that was also destroyed, Herculaneum. Here's a fun fact for everyone. In AD 79, when Pompeii erupted and it buried Herculaneum when Mount Vesuvius erupted and it buried Herculaneum and Pompeii, there was two famous people or infamous people who were there at that time, mostly Felix and Drusilla from the Bible. Remember when Felix said, Paul, come back to me when I have a convenient season to hear you? Well, turns out he went and vacationed in one of those two cities, and they were wiped out in this eruption.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. So total change of subject, but it's really the central subject.
Yes.
Why do we have health conversations? It is because we want to honor God with our bodies, right? Yeah. And so we just made a turn from the health conversation into the history here that Dr. Perenich also specializes in. That tells me, do not delay. Do not put off the day of preparation. While it is still called today, harden not your hearts as they did in the rebellion. Make a decision for Jesus today. I'm just reminding myself of that every day I've got to be walking with the Lord, because you never know what's going to happen next. He said, when it's convenient for me, I'm going to rethink my spiritual condition. Examine yourselves, friends, to see if ye be in the faith. And it's not some fearful message. It's a God with open arms, a Jesus who loves you and has died for you.
Right.
So receive that grace and walk in newness of life in him. And then, if I die in a car accident tomorrow, my next conscious thought will be the presence of Jesus and going to heaven with my loved ones. So we don't need to have any fear.
Amen. Amen. And so I had to throw that in there because it's related to this. So here's the interesting thing is that after, the population there, because it was an active volcano, and there was a lot of fluoride in their water already. And the fluoride is somewhat comparable to the amount of fluoride we have in our water today. And so after the volcano erupted and buried everyone in ash, their bones were perfectly preserved. You can see the corpses that were perfectly preserved in ash to this very day. So it was almost like a time capsule. It was a time capsule of what their health was like, particularly their bones. Not much soft tissue because most of that got burned off, but even their poses in death were preserved through all this ash and destruction. So
fascinating.
It's a time capsule. So what they looked at what the amount of fluoride in the water, and they were like, well, what did this do? And so you can see here in these pictures, and this is from the study itself. So they show these bones, and if you look where the arrow are, you can see the sternum, manubrium, what looks like a strange looking xiphoid process. It's actually quite, oops, lost that. Let me bring that back up. It's actually quite fascinating because if you look at the bones, and again, most people are going to look at it and say, well, isn't that what bones look like when you get old anyways? No, it actually shows destruction to the bones. That there was levels of arthritis, osteoarthritis, to be specific, all sorts of degenerative changes in the bones. And you can see it all through here. This is the spine. This is the spinal column right here. And you can look on the edges. This is all osteophytosis. This is a CT scan here. You can see more osteophytosis. And this is the cervical spine here that shows degenerative joint disease. And they had a very high level of it, which tells us that even if we don't know what their IQs were, even if we don't know how it affected them cognitively, what we find is an unusually high level of degenerative bony change because of the amount of fluoride they were drinking in their waters. And so this article talks about the dangers of fluoride being in the water, because not just what it does to the brain, but what it does to the bones, and it hastens the actual degenerative changes that lead to debility and chronic pain. So you have to imagine that this had to be quite awful, that all these people here were suffering from that. And you can't see it, but in one of the bones, you can see tumors on it, all kinds of stuff. And they think it had everything to do with the levels of fluoride that they were drinking in the water. And again, this was accumulation. This wasn't just super toxic levels. This was low level, and they just accumulated it. And they
Dr. Tim,
Yeah.
I know I told you to roll, but I'm thinking audience members might be like, I've been drinking city water for 50, 60, 70 years. Can you do anything to detox, to reverse some of this if you think you may have some of this?
I think yes, I do think so. I think one of the things that can help is anything that's going to help you get your kidneys to working better. So again, it's all going to go back with diet. You got to clean that up. If you become more alkaline, that's going to help you. Also, balancing your magnesium to calcium, making sure you're getting the right amount of magnesium. There's probably ways to excrete it, but I think it's mostly through your kidneys. So there are detoxes, there are cleanses, there are juice fasts, all those things. Anything that's going to increase renal excretion of these minerals in your body is
Get
going
meat
to
and
help.
dairy out. Isn't that hard on
Oh,
the
yeah,
kidneys?
absolutely. Dairy, yeah, because if the cows are drinking or if the cows are eating grass that was sprayed with fluoridated water, that's going in the milk.
Well, and it doesn't meat harm the kidneys.
Right, all of it. Right, meat. Well, yes, meat harms the kidneys as well. I think one of the largest causes of not renal toxicity, but kidney damage is type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes, everyone thinks is a sugar disorder, but studies have shown that high fat diets actually push type 2 diabetes. I'm not saying sugar isn't a cause. Don't get me wrong. You're never going to hear me say that eating Skittles is ever good for you. But what I will tell you is that high fat diets, and particularly animal products that are high in fat, are not going to be good for you fighting type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
And type 2 diabetes is going to be your number one driver of kidney disease.
Okay.
So that's going to be huge. So
well, you keep rolling. I just want to make sure people know, your body will heal itself. Like God made you very versatile. Just eat a very healthy diet and don't be taking more fluoride in to the extent that you can, and you'll be great.
No, and in some of these, if you're not too old, exercise is actually going to help because it will help remineralize the bones in a way that you want. But you got to put the right stuff in there. So
the magnesium, calcium, that was the key point.
Magnesium,
I get look into that. Yeah.
Yep. So anyways, here's another article, and this was published in 2012. And in this article, this is the Journal of Dentistry in Tehran, Iran. And they noticed this article was sort of controversial because in their government there, they were like, hey, fluoride's good. And these guys were looking at it because they care about their children. They're like, well, we noticed that it's affecting the IQs of children in this area where they have a little bit higher than normal fluoride levels. But here's the problem. Even if it's high, you have to remember it's an accumulation. So even if you have a lower level than the county next to you, but you drink that water for 50 years, well, guess what? It's going to be there. If someone lives in the county with high levels, but moves away when they're 10 and 15, you're going to have still more than them. And again, we're talking about brain development. And so this doesn't just mean the children after they come out of the womb. This also means mom drinking water while the baby's in the womb. So this is a real issue. And so they point all this out like this was a real problem for them. That fluoride in these areas was damaging IQ. And they say they controlled for socioeconomic and parents' education. They controlled all of these things. And they were absolutely convinced that fluoride had something to do with lowering the IQs. And again, this is 2012. And so here's another.
Should you replace fluoride with iodine?
Yeah, well, they compete for one another.
Yeah.
They compete for one another. So if you can increase your iodine, you may be able to displace, or you may be able to you get the effects that you need without, hurting yourself. And so
I meant individually, by the way. I didn't mean mass medicate people with iodine.
No, I don't want fluoride in the water. But listen, if you buy salt that has iodine in it, that's one way to get it. But a lot of people talk about taking good iodine supplements, and that's fine. But iodine also comes in seaweed and other vegetables like that. And you find the ones that have it. And I like seaweed. So
we have a debate in my family whether seaweed is it a human right to not have seaweed eaten in your presence if you have such a distaste and a revulsion for the smell of it. I am an advocate for you must take your seaweed and eat it outside. And I take an iodine supplement. Actually, we sell an iodine supplement at vitaliving.health. I don't think we ever mentioned that to our audience.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of us in the family, I think two out of the 5 family members will eat that seaweed. The other 3 are like, give me the supplement. I can't handle it.
They're like, I'll do it. Yeah, no, I'm with you. This is a 2013 article. And again, they did a systematic review of prenatal exposure. And they definitely found a possibility of it inhibiting or lowering IQs and slowing down neurological development. I mean, think about this. I mean, you're finding something that's going to hurt cognition, and some people believe it can calcify your pineal gland. I don't know of that exactly. I don't know. I do know that it can calcify soft tissue. That I do know. That we're actually taught when we take radiology. You're taught to understand how fluoride, too much of it, they were obviously for it, but how too much of it can be deposited in soft tissue like ligaments and muscles and things like that. And once you get calcium in there, it can cause other problems. So, but here's another study in 2012. So, I mean, again, you're seeing the evidence just keep stacking up. What's funny is that in this journal, people wrote in and they were very upset. So I actually put their response. They were upset about it because they're like, well, no, it's still ineffective. It's safe and effective. And they try to condemn the study. So they were trying to say, no, we need more studies. We need more studies. Well, here's the study right here. This study was published in the Journal of American Medical Association. Now, you and I are going to talk about these guys. And what your audience needs to know about the Journal of American Medical Association is they do not like supplements. They do not like alternative medicine. They've been for every single major public health policy that you can imagine. They've often excluded other doctors from practicing. They went after alternative doctors, even medical doctors who had different opinions. They've shut them down. They've silenced them. And so for them to publish an article from the University of Florida, which shows that fluoride has an influence on, especially when mom is drinking it, fluoride has an influence on the neurological development of children. They published it in 2024. And this is what it says. The cohort study found that the prenatal fluoride exposure was associated with increased risk of neurobehavioral problems among children residing in the U.S. Now, I just want to stop right here. No, this tells you this is no longer conspiracy theory.
Dr. Tim is here on the interview today promoting mainstream medicine.
That's right. That's right. Mark it down on your calendars. And again, I tell you, I probably disagree with these guys. I mean, listen, if the Journal of American Medical Association told me the sky was blue, I'd go outside to check. That's how I am. But the fact that they're saying this, and so this study was done by a professor from the University of Florida, and she talks about her research in here, and she is the one basically spearheaded all this research. And it was her work that got the attention of Dr. Joseph Ladapo, the Surgeon General of Florida. And I don't know if I'm behind. It got his attention, and it led him to make the recommendations to remove fluoride from public drinking water. So this definitely shows that we have moved the Overton window, so to speak. People are definitely changing their on fluorides. It is no longer conspiracy theory.
You know, on so many fronts, and that's why I want to have another interview with you where we talk about all these other things that were once ridiculed as conspiracy theories. They all, one by one, keep being validated and actually have been in the past, which you've shown us here. I think we're going to see the same thing with glyphosate and GMO and other things. It's just a matter of people becoming going through COVID, going through what we just went through the last 4 years, I think took a large segment of the population and helped them awaken to that not everything that you're receiving from institutional authorities is necessarily trustworthy. And I'm being careful here on this platform. Folks, we're going to continue over on beltoftruth.tv. In fact, subscribe to Dr. Tim's Rumble channel. I didn't mention that yet. Where can people get your book again?
You can get it. You can actually get it, I think, from, what is it, Revita Living? Can you get it? I think you can still get it there, right?
If it's not there, I'm going to make sure it's there. But, you know, just
if not,
what's your website?
RestoringTheRightHand.com.
There we go. Yeah, Restoring the Right Hand. I was going back and forth between hand and arm earlier, and I want to make sure we get all this right, because folks can book appointments with you, and folks, stay tuned to this channel. Dr. Tim's coming back, and he's launching some other efforts and initiatives helping us with, kind of how to be who God made us to be, particularly as men and helping young men with that journey. And so I'm looking forward to some other conversations on that. I'm looking forward to conversations on ancient history, biblical history, prophetic history, and also just discussing these other items that we've mentioned. But any last thoughts on the fluoride before we continue the interview over at beltoftruth.tv on the vaccination topic? That's, by the way, what Dr. Tim's book is about. Whoa. Dr. Tim's book is called Vaccination. And so he's an expert on exposing misinformation and making sure that we have that which is validated and true and science-based in the vaccination discussion. So the name of the book is Vaccination. Get it at restoringtherighthand.com. And last words on fluoride before we move over there.
Yeah, all I'd have to say is that sometimes our instincts about how to keep ourselves safe are worthy of further examination. So, when people were saying that they had a bad feeling about this, they went and did the research. And I think when someone says everyone has to have something, everyone needs to have this, it's safe and effective, and you don't feel right with it, go ahead and do the research to see maybe if your gut instinct is onto something. It's not always, right? We don't go by feelings, but sometimes it's important to do a little bit more research, and you'll be surprised what you find.
You got it. Thank you, Dr. Tim. And folks appreciated the Ron Meinhardt interview as well on the health. We're looking at alternative medicine, mainstream medicine, the history of medicine. We're going to have him back. We've had Jay Cameron. We're talking religious liberty, talking current events. And we've got 10 days of health. I forgot to mention that. So, just keep coming to this channel, 5:45 p.m. daily. And again, the QR code came up a second ago for the Revita Living products. So just go to revitaliving.health. And of course, Jeremy, great job tonight. Thanks to our producer, Christian Digital Network. From likes to lives changed, please scan that QR code and subscribe to the CDN YouTube channel for a bunch of great content from different sources. And Dr. Tim and I will continue at beltoftruth.tv. Again, go to the collection, go to the playlist called Belt of Truth Live, and you'll see Dr. Tim and I there on the thumbnail, and click it and enjoy the pre-recorded vaccine interview. I'm Scott Ritzema, your host with Belt of Truth Ministries, Dr. Tim with Restoring the Right Hand, Ritzema and Perenich. We'll see you all next time.